What's going on, folks? I prepared a presentation today due to witnessing another terrible argument, and I wanted to discuss it with other writers, get their perspective on it. So what I'm going to do is go around the chat, have everyone introduce themselves, and tell what we write, and then after that, we'll get into the actual presentation. Who wants to go first?
I can go. My name is Bernadette. I'm a sci-fi writer. I also aim in horror and dark sci-fi as well, and that's what I'm currently writing.
I can go next. Hey, I'm Xenonymous, Xenon for short. I write dark urban fantasy, action adventure, and action.
Hello, I'm BK. I write kid fantasy novels, draw comics, and write animation.
All right, and if you're familiar with the channel already, you know who I am, Kaine Walker. I write dark fantasy, dreadpunk, and I'm experimenting with a new genre that I'm coming up with called Cosmogoth. And tonight's discussion is going to be about the meaning of fiction and the suspension of disbelief, a roundtable discussion on storytelling, world building, and audience expectations. All right, so here's this slide is for our opening thoughts, and I want to get everyone's opinion on this premise from this Twitter page here. Memeslet's posted an argument saying, accepting the existence of magic in a fantasy setting should not be easier than accepting the existence of disabled people in a fantasy setting. So I want to get y'all's opinions first about the premise in general, because to me, it assumes a lot of things and leaves a lot of things out. So have at it.
Well, I guess the first thing I like to mention is when you try to address the topic, people will kind of always villainize you or try to misconstrue your argument. And that's why I'm going to phrase it the way I'm going to phrase it. I absolutely think that people with disabilities belong in fantasy, they belong in fiction, because it makes the worlds richer and more realistic. And the problem isn't the disability itself, but it's just inserting modern designs in a fantasy setting. Like, if you wanted to create a disabled character in your story, you could use magic. There's a lot of things you have available. The problem is it breaks the immersion world building, and when you try to address it in that sense, some people will try to spin it toward you that you're trying to be a bigoted. When the problem isn't the disability, it's just how it's being portrayed, and especially a warrior that's heavily muscular and their legs are very muscular despite them being in a wheelchair. Even if you think of it realistically, that just wouldn't work out. There are creative ways to justify certain things, and they use the most, uninspired, uncreative ways to incorporate interesting concepts that could possibly work, but they're just restricting themselves. And if you point these things out, you're called bigoted, and people tear apart your character for just addressing these kind of things.
I wanted to follow up on what you were saying as well, because people belong in fiction, obviously. And the thing that people are leaving out is that, yes, it is fiction, but some level of realism is pretty much required in order for it to be relatable or believable. So it's not the fact that disabled people exist in a story that makes it unbelievable. It's the context they're in. The origin of this argument doesn't have to do with disabled people in fiction in general. It has to do with D&D specifically, and how players think it makes sense to have a party member that uses a wheelchair for whatever reason. And it's not even necessarily that. It's the fact that why would you choose that whenever there's magic that can literally revive people from the dead and could most likely just heal your spine? So it just doesn't make any sense. That's the problem. It's unbelievable.
This relating to D&D, sometimes people kind of want to put themselves in the story, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, when you have a D&D session, you'll see a lot of people, they like to choose human. They'll choose things that they're more familiar with because that's just the way they want to play. But there's certain things you can do that doesn't break the setting, that doesn't break the immersion. That's what a lot of people who are disingenuous with this argument, they acknowledge one thing, that D&D is about, playing the story and expressing how you want to express yourself. But at the same time, you have to stick with the world building. You have to stick with the world structure. And there's ways you can do that if you want to incorporate a part of yourself in the story. You still can while following the world building and the lore.
I was going to say, context also does matter in terms of story writing, and thinking as a game developer, I should have mentioned that I'm also a game developer as well. Having a disabled character in there would have to have some sort of drawback included in it, like reducing movement or something like that, because if you're using like a wheelchair, realistically, you won't be able to access certain areas, and definitely traversing a forest would be a lot difficult too, so there's that. When it comes to the fantasy setting and the argument of I can use magic, you can definitely use magic to revive yourself too. This is what I mean by context. Like, you can include it, but like have it make sense, because I understand magic exists and you can just heal yourself to walk again. But if you want to keep the character disabled, make it a reason why they're still wheelchair bound. Like, are they at least only allowed to use a certain type of magic for specifically for body transfiguration or healing? Are certain prosthetics that would be way more efficient, like extremely costly as well, or so on and so forth?
Yeah, is magic rare? Magic unavailable in your region? Is it outlawed, which wouldn't stop anyone, but you get the point. There's a reason why someone would choose not to do it instead of it just being up in the air. Because if there's nothing preventing them from doing it, or there's no established rule that says that they can't, then why wouldn't they, right?
I think that's the key word here. It's like what makes fiction believable. It's not just pure realism. It's about consistency and narrative justification. Like, you see dragons in Game of Thrones, and that fits because it's woven into the story. But if you decided to put a wheelchair in Lord of the Rings, that doesn't make sense because there's no way to manufacture the wheelchair. There's nothing for it to exist in that story, and it just breaks the immersion.
In regards to fiction and reality in a setting, I didn't mention this earlier, but I am also an educator. So I have worked with disabled students and I have spoken to disabled students in regards to fantasy. Now, I've spoken to young people when it comes to being in a situation such as D&D or being in a situation such as Lord of the Rings. You are only limited by your imagination. Now, fantasy revolves about making situations that would be impossible possible. And in most cases, makes you capable of doing things that you could never do in the real world. But with that being said, there's a certain line of reality that must be acknowledged or must be circumvented. And when I say this, what I mean is, I had a student who lost a leg. He played an RPG game, made himself into a half human, half cyborg, gave himself a robotic leg.
See, that's creative.
This pretty much was his ability to handle the loss of a leg while still acknowledging the loss of the leg, but making it into a fantasy setting ability that helped him throughout the campaign. I had a student who was disabled since birth, doesn't know what it means to walk on pretty much their own accord without using machinery or using, in the case of the tiefling pig, a wheelchair. With that being said, my students, they loved NASCAR. So what they said was they wanted to have something that would allow them to speed blitz across the field in order to, take out enemies and dodge at supersonic speed. And I've had students who have had disabilities and they have recall on what it meant before their disabilities. They can place themselves into characters that are without disabilities, not feel any kind of way about it, and feel like they can be those characters. So when it comes to fiction, you can have it three ways in what I just explained. You can have it acknowledge your disability, you could have it being circumvented with your ability matching the world you're in and using something within that world in order to do everything that everyone else is doing, or you can be a character who does not have that disability, and there is nothing wrong with that. The only thing limiting you, apart from your imagination, is your ability to accept or work with whatever it is that you have or don't have in the fantasy situation that you are in.
Exactly. I'm glad that you said what you said, because this is another thing that I did not think of. You can have something else replace a lost limb that has nothing to do with a wheelchair. I don't even know why they picked a wheelchair, because like the first example that comes to mind when I think of this is Elden Ring, right? So there's actually a race of people who, I believe as they get older, they start to lose their legs. So they ride wolves to get around their inability to use their legs. So why wouldn't you incorporate something like that in a D&D setting? Like, there has to be something that makes keeping the disability like worth it, and it can't inconvenience the other party members. Like being able to ride a wolf or have like octopus arms for legs or something. You have to be able to justify having the disability without it compromising the story, one, and two, inconveniencing your party members. So it shows the lack of creativity that these people have when they're fixating on wheelchairs, when you can have, like you said, anything you want, because the limit is literally your imagination. I didn't even think about the mount aspect. I'm surprised it took me this long to think about it, because there's definitely ways around the inability to walk without a wheelchair. You know what I mean? And just why?
If your setting allows it, maybe they could regrow, like attach something to like attachments, for example.
Yeah.
Look at your world, see how it operates. You can find something if you're creative enough, and that would make it intriguing. I think doing that is more interesting and more fun to do than just throwing a wheelchair in the setting.
Moving on to slide number 2. Yes, we're going to have memes related to this topic throughout this. presentation. So I'm gonna read the meme for fun, right? So, so this is like, what is this? The Trojan War? I don't know what war it is, but it's some type of medieval war in which they use shields and spears, right? And
Pretty sure.
it is okay. It's from Lord of the Rings, and you can see the meme. You can see the meme, right? It says you can accept dragons, elves, and talking trees, but you can't accept a 2021 BMW 5 Series 530i with optional heated seating. Why are you so bigoted? Obviously, highlighting the absurdity of the argument because it's so obtuse that it misses context, such as the anachronism of a car being in a medieval setting. But anyway, slide number 2, the core premise, world building and suspension of disbelief, which is kind of only one of the many holes in that argument. So the question is, what makes something in fiction believable even when incongruent with our reality? Kind of cheated and answered it in the first slide, but anyway.
I kind of did too. I kind of mentioned like being and having a narrative justification.
This is related to what you wanted to say, Xenon, so go ahead and go
cool.
first.
All right, cool. Yeah, we already hit the nail on the head with, well, I did and so did Bernie, the last one. But what example of this would be to make it be believable was, I was thinking like 2 examples really, but I'm going to just say one. Part in One Piece, I think it was the Punk Hazard arc where a bunch of pirates ended up on this island. Mm-hmm. They were crippled, so the scientist that was on that island, Caesar Clown, basically gave them artificial robotic limbs, and that actually worked in the One Piece continuity because they still have the technology to make like temporary artificial limbs until Law came and basically made them chimeras in a way by chopping off their useless legs and replacing them with his devil fruit powers. But that sounds believable because we've seen devil fruits be able to be used in like the most wackiest of ways, and it never really broke the immersion. But with the example of the meme of like seeing a damn BMW in a medieval setting, that would just be like, why is this here?
Right.
That's almost like seeing like randomly a 2-headed horse just appears in your room for no reason.
That's so random. But that's the point. All right, so I realize we've pretty much answered this question already. What makes something believable in fiction, even when it's incongruent with our reality, is narrative justification and the way that the story explains why this thing exists. So what I want to do is ask each of you if you have an example of that from one or many of your favorite stories. I'm going to ask to go first because I will forget if I don't. So, all right. I guess I could use fairy tale, even though this isn't really one that I would want to use as an example, but I can. So the reason why magic exists in fairy tale, or one of the reasons, is because of this mystical stone called lacrima. And obviously, since it's found like deep in the earth, it imbues the soil and like, you know, the crust of the earth and yada yada with magical properties. I know fairy tale fans are going to get on me for like butchering it, but you've seen this type of mechanic in other stories anyway, so you get what I'm saying. Like, even if it's somewhat inexplicable, the story has some kind of reason for why magic exists, and lacrima is one of the reasons that magic exists in fairy tale. In a lot of other stories, the justification for certain things existing would be that it came from outer space or from an unknown place like the bottom of the ocean. And although you can't completely identify where it comes from, the thing existing itself is somewhat of a reason. Like fictional metals like mithril from Marvel Comics, you have adamantium, vibranium, and it's through the properties and uses of those metals that certain things that would normally not be possible become possible because of what those individual things can do. So you just take what they can do and stretch it to its logical conclusion and figure out how each of these things would be applied in the world. Like you would use adamantium to make armored vehicles, and one of the drawbacks is that it's really heavy, so you'd have to use less of it and things like that. Like there's always a way to make something believable, even if it's fictional or far-fetched in our real world. So anyone else have any examples?
I guess I could mention a video game. I think Subnautica does a really good job of doing something. If you didn't put much thought into it, would have been a really bad survival premise. Yeah. Just going on foreign planets and having magical tools build stuff for you. First off, you start off in a life pod, and this life pod is from a massive ship. So it makes sense that you have access to this technology that can help you, materialize things out of thin air as long as you have the materials. So just having that connection that you just came out of a life pod, the ship blowed up, and you're able to build things things with this device that you were given. Technically, you have to create the habitat builder, but you're given a tablet that the AI helps guide you through this new environment. It all makes sense, and if you didn't put much thought into it, you could have just easily designed a game, just you throw the character in and they start building things in a foreign planet. It just makes no sense. I have to throw Ark under the bus, although I love that game. Ark Survival, it's a little bit like that. There is some lore, but it's questionable. But comparing both games, I really like how Subnautica really integrated its story into the game, and it makes it even more interesting when you go deeper into the water where you see the giant sea creatures. It's justified because of how massive the ocean is. Like, when you learn more about this ocean, you learn that you're actually in a crater. The whole map is a crater, like an inactive volcano that erupted many years ago, and the rest of the ocean is just deep open sea. So just to put that in perspective, it really helps with the immersion. It brings in the fear, the fact that this is such a massive ocean planet and you're in the only area with some land. And even when you further progress with the story, I'm not going to spoil too much of it, but there's even a justification why the main ship landed in that crater and nowhere else. There's a justification that makes complete sense. You're really immersed if you look into the logs. I think the way it incorporates both the gameplay and story is just really well done, which could have been easily butchered if the developers didn't care about the game.
Great points. Not to steal any of your thunder here, Black, but you said you wanted to talk about Hawkeye and Black Widow and how that pertains to the concept of capability, especially when it's compared to, normal human beings fighting alongside these like god level beings.
There were actually three premises because I wanted people to have an understanding when it comes to belief in a world build and the suspension of that disbelief being logical. So, as you mentioned, there is Black Widow and there is Hawkeye. Mm-hmm. These two characters are people from the Avengers, especially from the more popular Avengers movie series, where you have two ordinary people who are extremely gifted as marksmen and as, super soldier spy types who kind of deal with situations that mostly revolve around human elements. Now, these characters are classified as superheroes, though to certain people, they would probably say, well, they're not technically superheroes. I would say to people that, yes, they are superheroes because they handle superhuman feats that regular people cannot do. And we see them do it so often that we can suspend our disbelief of them not fitting into certain parts. With that being said, though, we also have to look at them as characters who cannot do certain things unless they are gifted, blessed, or enhanced with certain abilities to handle said things.
Or tools.
Yes, exactly. Like, for most people who may not know or may not have enjoyed it, there was a video game called The Avengers that came out. And certain characters were given certain enhancements and abilities that allowed them to fight beyond human level, which would allow them to handle certain threats. Black Widow was one character in the game who was given, I believe, a tachyon field that enhanced her strength, speed, and capabilities with the weapons she had. And using those weapons and abilities, she would be able to take on giant robots, Hulkbuster-sized threats, things that she normally would not be able to handle on her own. But she was given means in which she could handle that.
Exactly.
When you have a build and you have characters that are especially human, and you want them to, quote, handle superhuman feats, again, even if it is fiction, the right way to handle that situation is to give them a means in which they can handle it. Saying, oh, she's a super spy. Oh, she knows this martial arts. Oh, he has great eye perceptive abilities. He can shoot a fly from 40 miles away. As great as that sounds, that's the limit of what their abilities are there. I cannot expect Black Widow or Hawkeye to take on the Hulk or Iron Man or Thor just because they know a little bit of this or they have a little bit of that or they have this ability here. You have to give them something which is, in the setting of that fiction, believable, so that within our reality and perception of what they're doing, we can believe that they can handle that insane level of fiction with a reasonable course of action.
To conclude, the name of the game is narrative justification. Okay, we waxed on a little bit about narrative justification, the suspension of disbelief, and world building, and we gave our opinions, right? So I wanted to challenge our own views a little bit and kind of give the people making this argument a bit of fairness, kind of try and steel man the position. Obviously, if there's anything I miss, they can address it in the comments section or community wall. But on this slide, like I said, challenging our own views. Are we too rigid? The question is, when is something out of place acceptable in fiction?
I guess the thing I could think of the top of my head is when you're doing D&D with a group of friends, because sometimes you're gonna do ridiculous things. You're gonna have inside jokes with a group of friends. I remember in our very well thought out story, it did upset the DM, but it was kind of funny. We had a Dorito quest. There's no possible way to have Doritos in this setting, because we had physical Doritos when we were playing D&D. It started as a joke of like stealing the whole bag of Doritos, and then somehow it got incorporated in the story. It was really funny at the time, but that wouldn't be something I would like present to the audience. It would be something, just a group of friends having fun. In that sense, I feel like that Dorito quest was a little fun thing I had with a group of friends.
Okay, that's a good point. So when the story doesn't take itself as seriously, and when it's just made for pure dumb fun, that's an acceptable way to have something out of place be in a fictional setting. Okay, yeah, parody. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Parody, absurdism, maybe even satire, all of those. Yeah, that's a great point, actually. Xenon, anything to add?
I was thinking, honestly, for like crossover stuff like that. I mean, this kind of falls into the category of fun, whimsical fun, but like, for example, you could take the entirety of Smash, because you're going to get stages where you're actually in another game universe, but then you literally see stuff that feels like it shouldn't be there. Or you can just take any fighting game that has a crossover character, like trying to think like
Akuma
like
in Tekken 7, it will live on in infamy.
Well, I was really gonna talk about Negan in Tekken, but like
Him too.
Negan alone just fell out of place because he's from The Walking Dead. Also, Kratos in Mortal Kombat, Jason Voorhees, the Predator, Alien, all of them in a crossover / cameo effect would be, I would say, acceptable, because it is a kind of non-canonical sort of thing.
Bro, y'all got a lot more mileage out of this question than I thought, because these were two interpretations that I did not take into account. This question actually stumped me for a while.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm dead serious. Like, no, that was good. So, like, when the story is a parody, a satire, or absurdist, that's a great argument for why something out of place can be acceptable in fiction. Crossover events where things normally wouldn't happen in a canon setting. Yeah, like fan-voted fights for crossover comics, or, guest characters in video games. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, because the characters will have abilities that break the entire rule set of the game. That's why people hated Akuma and Geese so much. They had a super beater. Yeah, those are great answers. I guess what would be mine when something out of place is acceptable in fiction? I guess I would have to define out of place in this context. Because, there's entire stories built around this concept. And one of my biggest inspirations for storytelling uses this a lot, like H.P. Lovecraft. There will be something from an unknown place that would disturb reality as we know it.
But in an odd way, it's part of the story. Like, it kind of makes, you know what I mean? Like, it might feel out of place, let's just say for the characters. Mm-hmm. But, like, for the story-wise, like, when you're reading it, it doesn't break the story. It's like following the story structure. Or, I don't know if I'm phrasing it right, but it's not out of place when something happens weird when the characters were investigating eldritch horrors and then they suddenly stumble upon an eldritch horror. Sure, they don't understand it, and sure, even the audience might be terrified of what's going on, but it doesn't feel out of place because in the way the narrative justified it, if you know what I'm saying.
No, I completely understand. So really, the only correct answer to this question is when putting something out of place in the story is exactly the point.
Yeah.
That's when it's
not out of place for like an eldritch horror to attack protagonists in a story with eldritch horror based things. I mean, if you did that to a kid's story where it's just, a little fun kid fantasy where, I don't know, kids are playing ball or whatever, and then all of a sudden there's an eldritch horror kidnapping them, then yes, that's out of place.
But that could make for a good story though. Something is taking the children.
Cthulhu. Isn't that already a story? Like it's called. I think it's called Something's Killing the Children.
Thought it was Something is Taking the Children, but that's the story I was referencing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually another good point then. Accidental. Yeah. It's like narrative. Yeah, if it's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered my piece adequately, but I think you guys carried me.
Discussion, so we might not be able to answer all pieces fully, and that's not the point. It's just to have a discussion.
I'm challenging my own views, Bernadette.
In regards to challenging of our own views, The issue is, and I've said this before in regards to fantasy, depends on the believability of the situation. And I meant that in the context when I was speaking that when we have situations that involve characters who, for argument's sake, are disabled and are in wheelchairs, for instance, we are putting a very modern concept into a world where it does not exist in a certain sense. If people were to say, oh, we're talking about a medieval world, we did not have wheelchairs in medieval worlds. So at times it's like when people say, oh, I should be able to have my wheelchair in a medieval world, realistically speaking, they didn't have it then. Technically speaking, you're breaking the world's logic by itself by having a wheelchair in a world like that. But at the same time, there is a certain reason as to why, as we mentioned before, certain people want to have certain concepts that work with them. So again, even though we're talking about fantasy, there is also something we can work with, which was just mentioned earlier, which is exactly not that we are too rigid, but is our world too rigid? There is a concept mentioned in Something is Killing Children. It's believable in the sense of the fact that you have these weird creatures that appear out of nowhere and are destroying children for whatever reason that they do.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this because, quite frankly, they are monstrous horrors that are hidden behind a veil in reality that cannot be perceived except by a few select people. From the quote House of Slaughter, for instance, who are naturally gifted people or trained people who hunt down said monsters. Now, it works within the setting because even though they are monsters that are unseen in a world, there are elements that make it happen. So, thusly, it's very believable to see a character say, oh, this creature appeared out of nowhere and just suddenly killed somebody and then disappeared. There are elements and mechanics behind it, so it works. Now, if we were talking about, say, is everyone here aware of a character who goes by the name of Samurai Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
example, by the way.
All right.
Shout out Genji.
So now, Samurai Jack would be a good example of a character who should be incapable of handling situations in a world that is
Yeah, a man out of
scientifically-
time. Perfect. Yeah, that's another interpretation.
You know, he has nothing on himself that speaks to, quote unquote, being able to deal with the world that he's living in. He's living in a futuristic setting where technology has literally built like gunner machines, robots, AI, satellites, the whole nine yards. Yet he survives in it with nothing more than his wits, his training, and a sword that can, quote, cut through all evil. Now, does the sword in many cases break the logic of the world? Yes, it does. But at the same time, it's still a weapon that binds to the character a sense of fiction that allows him to work within a world and take on enemies and threats that normally people would be incapable of handling. It depends on both the situation at hand and the world at hand. And I'll play devil's advocate. You can even accept a wheelchair-bound person in a fantasy setting, but there has to be something, as I mentioned before, that works within the bindings of that world that does not hinder the story, does not hinder the cast, does not make it feel like there's a mountain full of, exemptions just because, and puts that story on a very realistic fantasy style storytelling narrative.
Great points. I do want to kind of add to that and put the overall argument into perspective again, right? The question suggests that the idea of having both disabled people and wheelchairs in the setting at all is the part that's objectionable, when, like I said, that's not the case, right? Narrative justification. Obviously, in a D&D setting where you have high levels of technology from ancient civilizations and the like, you would probably find someone who's able to make a wheelchair. That's literally not the problem. That's one. Two, disabled people. Obviously, they would exist. You would have amputees, you would have paraplegics, quadriplegics, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. The argument centers around, again, like the party members choosing to be disabled when they do not have to be. Or if they are disabled, not choosing to do something like you said, like add a cybernetic limb or put something in place of the missing limb that actually helps the party instead of completely derailing the experience for everyone else. Like, as a lot of people have been saying, dungeons are not wheelchair accessible. Like, that is the problem, not the existence abuse of anyone, but how it conflicts with the story or the experience of the party members. Yeah, just so people are aware. Your points didn't suggest the opposite of any of that. I was just doing that for the sake of the discussion, so people can't misconstrue anything. Does anyone else have anything to add before we move on to our next slide?
I could see a wheelchair in a medieval setting if it's done for a very comedic reason. Maybe I could imagine like a dwarf somehow made a similar wheelchair to give it to a wizard to piss him off, like something like if it's like a very comedic or satire setting, I could see certain elements like that working. The story itself is trying to take itself seriously. It's not going to work.
It's not about whether or not it takes itself seriously, because you could even make the wheelchair thing work seriously in a fictional setting. It's just like, are you going for historical accuracy or not? That's the real argument there.
Oh, I was gonna say that this made me think of Avatar, The Last Airbender. Like there was a kid who actually was in a wheelchair, but like that one made sense. Literally, it literally could glide if he wanted to, because his dad was actually like a engineer and he was just testing out ways to help out his son. So
there you go, narrative justification.
Another thing, Toph is blind, but her powers justified how she's able to navigate the world, and she's a very well-written character.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. She has a way around her disability.
Yeah, using her earthbending, and I think that's really cool.
Oh yeah, she's a great character. Oh my god, I love this meme. Oh my god.
I remember this one. I remember seeing this.
I have to read this.
Go ahead.
I have to read the... Oh man. So you see the meme. You are walking in the dark alley. Suddenly this guy appears and demands you hand over all your money and gear. Realistically speaking, what were they thinking? The first person says, I cast heat metal on his wheelchair. Second person, acting as the DM, says it's a very high and expensive spell anon. And then...
you have to read it like this. It's very high and expensive spell anon.
And then they double down.
Heat metal on his freaking wheelchair.
Yeah, they double down. Yeah, this is great. So great.
I can see it deep and guttural like a dwarf.
I can see it now, man. It's a very high and expensive spell on. I cast heat metal. It's great. All right. You can't protect the characters. Like, he decided to rob me. You can't just jump in and try to save him. What is this? He's an assailant. Stupid DM.
I mean, like, if you didn't want to get pushed off his wheelchair, you shouldn't try to rob me.
Exactly.
Like, that wouldn't have happened if you didn't pull out your sword.
It's so silly.
What is he going to do from Archer?
I don't want to get into it.
Oh, I know how to escape him. Just go up one step, and you're good.
You're Freddy.
All right. Slide number 4. Slide 3. The bigger picture. The meaning of fiction. The question is, who's to say what should be easier to accept? Should fiction challenge what we believe or reinforce it?
Okay, so my only thought so far is, and I say this respectfully, is the fact that we literally have wheelchairs in every picture, and my brain is like, are there no other disabilities we could probably run off? Out of curiosity. But to this, I will say one thing, because I recently saw a trailer online, and the meaning of fiction is very interesting. Like I said, it depends on your world build. Are you doing a very strict, rigorous world build where certain thing follows a certain level of logic that we have? Or are you being a bit more loosey-goosey with the world build that you have? And thusly, things could be usable. There was a trailer that came out for a video game. The trailer was called Kingsmakers. So, in this trailer, you play as a person who, for some reason, finds himself shifted from the modern day era into medieval times. And you're a guy out of time again. But this time, you're strapped with an AK-47, aerial support with helicopters that shoot missiles, and a car or a pickup truck that can run through enemies pretty much like a battering ram made out of lava through butter. If you have a character who literally is in a dark alleyway, threatening to attack you with a knife, while they themselves are bound to a wheelchair, The logic of the situation dictates that, quite frankly, you, the person who are about to be robbed, are literally at an advantage. Unless the person is going to do something such as, use their innate abilities, like, say, maybe arcane magic, or silver tongue speak, or some form of, like, magic hypnosis or whatnot, to throw you off your guards. It's like a part of me is going to ask, what exactly do you think is going to happen here? It's not that it should be easier to accept the situation that we're given. It's the fact that, again, how does logic handle the situation we're in? And if it needs to be reinforced, again, you are a person in a wheelchair who is attempting to rob somebody in an alleyway. I mentally can't see how this is going to work in your favor unless you do something that goes beyond using just a simple knife to get what you want.
Yeah, exactly. So this example was very funny, but it was actually very helpful in illustrating pretty much the premise of the question, like, should fiction challenge us or should it reinforce what we believe, right? Because, well, in my opinion, I think fiction can do all of those things, but it's like you kind of brought up, the story kind of has to lend itself to one or the other. I have to be able to take the story seriously enough to be able to do either one of them, like you said. And if you're a bandit hopping out of actually, I don't even know how this guy would approach you. Like, does he roll up to you? Like, did he like?
He rolls from the shadows.
Right. Like
the two bumping walls.
Like, crap,
yeah,
Run your pocket.
it's gonna be hard. It's gonna be really hard to immerse myself in the story. To be able to do either one.
And another thing I just kind of thought of, can you imagine, let's just say you have a fantasy setting and you have this evil, bad villain, whatever, demon lord, and he's in his castle, and all of a sudden this evil, bad demon lord, he has a wheelchair ramp for your characters that are all wheelchair bound. Like, can you...
Evil layers are not wheelchair accessible. No.
Yeah, so that, like, that's what I'm saying. You see a lot of shows and movies, they have like giant towers where the protagonists, they have to like scale up or dig under or try to find a way to enter the front gates with disguise. And I don't think, like in a modern day wheelchair, those options are gonna work for you.
I'm sorry. I keep looking at this image, and my first thought is, you are a person in a wheelchair. When you bring in something that is literally non-magical as a person who cannot do bare necessities of what is a given combat situation, and you say, well, you will accept this defeat, good sir. Now give me your money and your gear. My first response to that is, all I have to do is literally turn about face and walk away. Not run, not glide, not even hop, just walk away. You're going to have to find a way to not only put away the knife, but start moving both sides of your wheelchair to come after me. Her in the corner, chase me down in the crowded street.
I want to recenter us because I don't know if we're meeting the criteria of the question at this point. I'll read it again.
It's a meme.
Yeah, it's because of the meme.
The meme is taking all the attention. That's what's going on.
It is. Who's to say what should be easier to accept? Should fiction challenge what we believe or reinforce it? What do you guys think?
If I were to put it in words, I think 3 factors should be incorporated. I think the creator's intent, the audience expectations, and also the way the story is written, its own rules and stuff. Those 3 factors kind of basically determines whether this fiction piece is able to accept or not. And I'll give One Piece an example because, Xenon mentioned it. It's very wacky, but it works in that world. No matter the amount of ridiculous fruits they have, it just works because everything else in that world is so out of place that it's in place. I think that's what really makes One Piece work. The creator has to intend on, what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to be more comedic? Am I trying to be serious? Even with One Piece, like, they have serious moments despite a lot of the wacky elements. Like, it's definitely well written in that regard. And then it's what the audience expected. Okay, if I'm going into the movie theaters and I want to go see a spy thriller, and I walk in and the movie is all about a writer that wrote a spy thriller.
Oh my god! I know what you're talking about.
I know what you're referencing.
I know what you're referencing. I'm sorry. The trailer pissed me off. Go ahead.
if you go in wanting to see a spy thriller and then that's how it opens. A person who writes a spy thriller and there's a melodrama before the spy thriller comes to life. That's kind of not what you were expecting. And my final point was the story having to follow its own rules. So if your story could somehow fit ridiculous elements or unrealistic things, we like to call it, or whatever you want to call it, if it works in your story, then you could have it. Nobody's stopping you from having it. But if it's breaking the world building, if it's jeopardizing, the character's development, if it's breaking fundamentally the themes of your story, then whatever you're putting in shouldn't be in the story.
Your answer basically boils down to it depends on the story.
Yeah, basically 3 factors: the creator's intent, the audience's expectations, and what the story rules are. That's my 3 major factors.
Honestly, I kind of have to go with Bernie on this one because, well, I mean, I do have my own criteria because I do think fiction should do both, honestly, because it should challenge what we believe in for the shock value and, like for suspense, keep us on edge, keep us watching, keep us entertained, but also it should reinforce it, as in not to, break the immersion / make me not want to watch something, like how polarizing it is for like something to be like canonically happen, but then out of nowhere it just like, oh, it's gone. Like, what do you mean it's gone? Like, no, it's just gone.
Yep.
Yeah, like like watching Ninja Kamui, and then I was seeing this cool ninjutsu stuff, and then it gets replaced by cybernetic armor, and then no more ninjutsu. It's like, yeah.
Or things that realistically should happen but never do. Like a famous example is Krillin never using solar flare and Genzan at the same time. Never does it. Has everyone had adequate time to answer the question? I know we each kind of hammered on believability as it pertains to writing craft and the way the story is told. But what about philosophically? Has anyone weighed in on that?
I guess I can add to that. I guess it depends on the kind of theme you're doing and the kind of story you're trying to serve. So, like, if you want to challenge something, maybe you have a monster in that story that everyone deems is evil and stuff like that, but then this monster has actually been helping people. That's like one way the story is challenging the way we see the world. But if you want to reinforce another theme, like love matters, that it's okay to get help, like stuff like that you can reinforce that could really, connect with the readers. A story should be able to do both, I believe. Where some themes are challenged while other themes are reinforced. I think it makes a story more alive and it gives more soul to the story when you manage to incorporate both in different ways. You don't have to challenge and reinforce this one theme, but have one theme be challenged and another theme be reinforced, just to give your story more weight and agency.
Right. So this is kind of a bad question, bad in quotation marks, because the answer might be obvious to most, but like I said, the point of the question is, the discussion. Somebody might say something that we've never thought of before, which has already happened a couple times. So Xenon, anything to add before we move on to the final slide of the presentation?
I mean, just to add on what Bernadette just said, the example that comes to mind that kind of does the thing philosophically is Batman, honestly, because I know people have an issue with his no-kill rule, but for me, it's always like a really interesting moral kind of dilemma because the easy answer
vigilante concept, period. Vigilante, anti-hero, yada, yada. Yeah, that's...
Yeah, but for Batman specifically, like for someone else with not like having his moral code, like let's just say Azrael, the easy answer is just kill him, like kill the villains, right? But like when it comes to the character of Bruce Wayne Batman, he's like, I can't, because if I do, I think Batman from Under the Red Hood said it the best, is like, it's not that it's hard, it'll be too damn easy, because he's basically saying that he's been holding back aggression the entire time. Like if he just starts killing, he's not going to stop. It won't just be one and done. He's just going to keep doing it over and over, and then he becomes the villain. He'll become the thing he hates the most.
Right. Tons of stories do that. Like you have stories like 1984, which is supposed to challenge our view of, politics and war and government. Stories like Freyrin, which is supposed to challenge our views on prejudice and, there possibly being a justifiable reason to dislike an entire group or race or whatever. A lot of people don't like that, but that's the point. Like the point of fiction is to be a testing ground for all manner of philosophies. What if I could make a world where that line of reasoning was justifiable. And just the act of doing that is what makes the story compelling. But for some reason, if you like stories like that, people see it as an endorsement to use it in real life for whatever reason. They take it as a moral slight when really what it is a thought experiment, or, you know, just an alternate historical view of something. But yeah, there's plenty of stories that kind of lean on forbidden concepts and things like that. And I think that's also a very important aspect of fictional storytelling, in my opinion. That's why I wanted to circle back to the second interpretation as it pertains to philosophy. For our final thoughts, the question is, what do you think is the meaning of fiction? And yes, this question is intentionally obtuse. This meme is unrelated. It's just, this technically isn't a meme. For this slide, this is unrelated. It's just a visual aid.
You're wrong. They are a meme. They just don't know it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, see, that's kind of where the meaning of fiction is to incorporate elements of fantasy and a step away from reality. Fiction is supposed to be a place where people can see certain concepts of themselves or see a world where they can enjoy handling a situation like being in a giant robot and fighting against a planetary AI that wants to destroy the world, or being a gangster as part of a group that just, quote unquote, is trying to take over a city after they've been kicked out by a, quote, Russian mafia, or being a shark in a game where you get revenge on a shark hunter. And you don't have to stress with the, quote, logic of the world so much that you cannot find an escapism of enjoyment. Because that way you can enjoy yourself, have escapism, and be able to see or do things that you wouldn't be able to do and be happy with it.
I was going to say, the meaning of fiction, honestly, is an experience where you can actually bend reality however you want it to be, but that reality that you make has to have rules. Otherwise, it would just be incoherent chaos. No, just anything and everything happens. I mean, in terms of your own imagination, it's your imagination. Go ahead. That can be yours. But like in terms of storytelling, games, writing, whatever, it has to have boundaries. It has to have rules. It has to have restrictions, right? And kind of piggybacking on what Black says, if you have a character injected in there, clearly breaking those rules and not following those rules, I think they kind of can't exist because I'm not even talking about immersion. It just breaks the entire continuity of what you're trying to set up.
Right.
Yeah, you're just making a contradiction for yourself at that point.
Bernie?
Well, I would say it's kind of a very generalized question, but I think a couple things that you haven't already mentioned that, I already agree that fiction is also a thought experiment. It's like escape. One thing I'll also dwell on is that fiction also mirrors our society, whether we really think about it or not. Our human emotions, mirrors conflicts, personal conflicts, whether it's like in relationships, family conflicts, work conflicts, and even, society issues. And Lord of the Rings, a great example, was a critique against fascism. There's a lot of undermining themes of, power and corruption. If you look at the original books, there's, even if it's like, even it's not out, it's not in your face, but that story was written, if you read like Tolkien's, his life story, the way he wrote Lord of the Rings, he wrote it in a dark time. Like the way the characters bond with each other, he built that experience from being in the trenches in World War One. So yeah, that's why you see how close Frodo, Aragorn, all those characters being so close to each other. It was because he wrote part of his experiences in the trenches, and I think that's a crazy thing that we're never gonna get in this modern day. Like, you're never gonna see that perspective because, like, we don't fight trench wars anymore. We're in a day of drones, and there's different military experiences people could explore, but to have that's a very specific experience, that's kind of like forever.
That's the word. There you go. That was the word I was hoping you would say. It's not necessarily about like fighting in the trenches. It's about people no longer having experiences.
Yeah, that's an experience that's probably never going to happen. We're never going to have a trench war unless somehow, our technology reverts to, nuclear war or something. I don't know. But there's never going to be an experience of trench wars anymore. And he was able to recapture his experience in reality in Lord of the Rings. Even not exactly exactly the situation, but just the emotions was saved in that story. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, each of you said your thoughts on what you think fiction means very well. And like I said, obviously this question is obtuse on purpose. It's meant to kind of stir the coals on what you think and what your opinion is. So for me, I kind of already alluded to it because you brought up part of it in your answer about what I said in the previous slide. I think the meaning of fiction is to use your imagination to mimic life as we know it and life as we do not know it. And the way I do that personally and the way I've seen it done by other writers is by using it as a giant laboratory for thought experiments. You take a concept that may be ridiculous in reality or absurd or distasteful or, frowned upon, and in your head, you go, okay, what if I could make a world or a story where this idea that is so taboo, I guess the word would be, not even necessarily that justifiable. And that's why I like stories like 1984, stories like Freyrin, stories like Warhammer 40K, where you have a lot of these concepts that are very grim, dark, or I guess forbidden, and you play with those ideas, you draw them to their logical conclusions, and you essentially force the reader to think about what it would mean as it is applied to the world in the story and the world that they currently live in. Just kind of draw conclusions and derive meaning from what's being presented in fiction. Of course, it's meant for fun as well, but the thought experiment portion is my idea of fun with fiction. It's being able to do what you can't do in reality, or being able to think what you can't think in reality.
Oh, hello.
Hello there.
You're not supposed to be here.
Well, fine then, I'll leave. Jeez.
No, you can stay, damn it. You can stay. Did you have an answer for this question?
What is the meaning of fiction? Well, to sum it up into one word, I guess you could say for me, it's freedom. The ability to create a world of your own design, or escape to a world of someone else's design, or whatever.
Very brief. All right. Now, did you want to elaborate?
For example, I'm playing Monster Hunter right now. I cannot wield giant weapons. I'm not that strong and never will be. And yet this game gives me the ability to do that. It gives me the freedom to fight monsters that don't exist or wield weapons that are absolutely impossible and escape from reality. But there has to be just a little bit of believability to it. For example, in Monster Hunter, they explained a very long time ago how people are able to do this. Basically, some parts of humanity evolved in order to be able to fight monsters, and some didn't. That's the explanation, and it makes sense. That would happen, right? The constant struggle to survival, eventually human beings would get stronger if that was their day in life all the time, right?
Yeah, especially if they were eating monster meat or something, like they could.
Yeah, they did.
Physiology.
They did eat monster meat.
Yeah, that could affect their physiology, and you would pass on that to your offspring. Yeah, that would make perfect sense.
Like, they took something that was absolutely unbelievable, but they made it make sense. And that's like the clincher when it comes to fiction. Make something unbelievable, but give an explanation as to how that works.
Yep, narrative justification.
Or if you can't, just say magic.
No, a wizard did it. Sucks. I hate that explanation. How did the wizard do it?
He just did it, lol. Skill issue.
that was my little magic excuse at the end there. Hopped in right at the end, and I
Let's go.
it.
Oh no,
you almost ruined it.